Folks, welcome to a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show as we enter a new year, 2016. My guest has been playing music, improvisational melodic music, for the last 60 plus years in a live setting and even more. It's really an honor to connect with him. Bill Crow, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh, nice to be here.
Did you know Jerry Heldman?
No, I don't think so.
Jerry was very instrumental in the Seattle jazz nightclub scene. I realize you moved to New York, but you did play after-hours clubs in Seattle?
Well, I did just for a short while. While I was growing up in Kirkland across Lake Washington, I had no idea that all that jazz was going on in Seattle. I was a record collector, but I thought the jazz was all in California and New York. And when I came back out of the Army and started going to the University of Washington, I discovered all these musicians and started playing and hanging out. And we had jam sessions at the university, and I hung out in several Chinese restaurants that had jazz and a couple of after-hours clubs. And then I was only there for about a year before I was talked into coming to New York.
Who were some of the cats that you met when you moved to Seattle?
Well, that year, the first guy I met was a piano player named Kenny Kimball, who found me. I was practicing my valve trombone in one of the practice rooms at the music building, and he came over and knocked on the door and said, "Gee, if you like to play jazz, come by in the afternoon at such and such a room." And there I met Chuck Metcalf and Dick Nelson was a trumpet player from my old high school, so I knew him. And let's see, who else was around? Well, Quincy Jones was around. He was still in high school. He was about 18.
Really? He was going to high school in Seattle?
Yeah.
Wow, that's hysterical.
And as soon as he met me, he said, "Oh, trombone player, I need one for this rehearsal band I've got going. Belongs to Bumps Blackwell." And he was starting to write charts for that band. So I went over, and he wrote a new chart and gave me a trombone solo. That was very nice. And I found out that he was going over to this blind piano player, R.C., who lived nearby. And he'd go over there in the afternoon after school, and R.C. would show him chords and stuff and ways to harmonize standard tunes. And he would apply that to his writing. Well, R.C., of course, was Ray Charles. And at that time, R.C. had a little group called the Maxim Trio, and he was singing and playing piano and trying to sound like Nat Cole.
Right. That's right.
And Bumps Blackwell had a little gig down at the Washington Social and Educational Club, was a nightclub in the Black District there. And R.C. was playing piano with him, and once in a while alto saxophone. So I was poking around in the record bins I had a gig downtown playing drums at a kind of a place called the Cirque Club that had singers and dancing. And there was a record store downstairs, so in the afternoon after a rehearsal, I was in there poking through the bebop bins. And the girl behind the counter comes over and says, "You must be a musician, because nobody else looks in those bins." And Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, you know. So that was Janet Thurlow. She was a singer and later married to trombone player Jimmy Cleveland. And she was the one that told me about the Washington Social, took me down there and introduced me to Ray. And she said, "You got to hear him sing the blues." So she says, Ray, you know, R.C., everybody called him R.C. R.C., sing the blues. So he did. He laid back and sang a wonderful blues, and then we were introduced afterwards, and she says, I said to him, "Gee, He says, why don't you sing like that all the time? That's wonderful. He says, oh, man, where I come from, everybody sings like that. You can't make a nickel singing like that. It was less than a year later that he had his first hit singing like that.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, is there a way for you to talk about how Bird and Dizzy took the big band swing jazz and made it into bebop?
Well, it was kind of a gradual progression. If you listen to records from back in the mid-'40s of people like Coleman Hawkins and Don Byas and some of those guys, you already hear that tendency to run the changes and in a way that the swing players were more like improvising new melodies or variations of the old melodies, things like that.
Right.
But some of these guys were making melodies out of running the changes, and the harmonies were getting more modern as people like Nat Cole and Al Haig and Hank Jones, started finding substitutions that were more interesting, and so little by little, it was like Dizzy got onto it through almost like a rhythmic path. He was interested in rhythmic figures, and especially in Latin rhythms and Cuban rhythms. And Kenny Clark, they were interested in playing faster too. And Kenny Clark was one of the guys that changed the way drummers played, because he couldn't play the bass drum that fast.
Right.
He didn't really have chops to execute things well. He used a lot of rebound, and he wasn't a trained technician, but he heard the music in a wonderful dancey way. And he figured out that if he left out the 4/4 on the bass drum, just use it for accents, and put the time on the ride cymbal, then you could hear the bass player, and you could hear the piano chords better, and he didn't have to work so hard. So as soon as the other drummers saw what he was doing, they jumped right on that. Max Roach took it to another level, and Roy Haynes, wonderful players, and Stan Levy and guys like that.
You attribute, I've heard, I really like the way you broke that down, but would you say that Kenny Clark was the first cat to play a more less traditional, less technical style of drumming, and that those cats were definitely inspired by him?
Well, it's like a continuum. Joe Jones probably figured out some of that stuff when he was playing with Basie, but it was a different, he wasn't playing so much bass drum, and his cymbal work was really, and I asked Joe about that one time, and he said Walter Page, that was all his idea, He said we wanted to hear the bass and the guitar, so he got the drummer to cool it a little bit and play more on the cymbals and not so much on the drum. I
dig. What's fascinating is the idea that you, out of many instruments, you played drums, and there was that whole hullabaloo. I've done so much research and interviews with cats that were coming, when at Newport in the 60s with the folk festival, when Dylan brought a trap set on the stage for the first time, and Alan Lomax and him, or Albert Grossman and Lomax almost got in a fight because of the drums in a folk setting. And I'm like, guys like Bill Crow, you guys were playing drums was very much a part of the jazz idiom. It swung the band.
Oh, sure. Well, see, I was lucky. I got interested in playing the drums by default when I was in high school. I was trying to play the alto sax, and I came back the second year, and so many new alto sax players had come in from a different high school that I was out of a job, but the drummer had graduated. And so I quick learned how to play the drums so I could stay in the band. And I didn't really know anything about it except what I heard on records. I thought Gene Krupa and Sid Catlett and Joe Jones, people like that were, what I heard on the records. I thought they were wonderful, but I didn't really know what to do from except try to keep it from speeding up or slowing down, and try to play something that sounded smooth. So when I met Buzzy Bridgeford in Seattle after I got out of the Army, he was a drummer that could swing his head off and had very little technique, but he just knew how to swing. His ideal was Dave Tuff, who was a very simple drummer but was a strong swinger. And he admired Joe Jones and Shadow Wilson, people like that had played with Basie, And he just showed me what to do. He showed me how to swing. And so when I was trying to play the drums a little bit, he showed me that. And then when he talked me into being a bass player, I just transferred it over to the bass, and try to get that same feel going.
Can you talk a little bit about that? As a non-musician, just talk to the audience about how you were able to take the rhythmic foundations of swing on the drum set over to the K bass.
Well, the bass, besides establishing the roots of the chords and trying to make a line that pulls you through the harmony in a nice way, the time feeling is very important, both all by itself and the way it matches the drummer and the way it matches the whole band. And the whole idea that Buzzy taught me was that it's a lively kind of springing. He said the bass sounds better if the notes ring one into the next one, and he said swing is like. He said, did you ever roll a tire down the street? He said, once you get it going, you don't have to push it. It goes by itself. You just have to guide it a little bit.
That's right.
And he says, if it feels like that, you're probably doing it right.
Can you say that at the time that you came to New York in what year?
1950, January.
1950, and
Birdland had just opened the month before I got here.
My gosh!
And Bird was there.
Bird was at Birdland.
Yeah. And he could get in for about 75 cents and sit there all night and listen. Didn't have to buy anything.
Can you talk about seeing Charlie? I also ask a lot of cats about Train. If they ever play, if they've had a chance to play with him or Elvin. But can you talk about? I think just for my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, and Bird. He almost gets to this deity, or is treated like a deity. But can you talk a little bit about Bird? Did you know him personally, and did you see him play a lot?
Well, yeah, I got to know him as a friend because he was an old friend of Dave Lambert's, who took me under his wing. Dave was scuffling around town at the time, and he showed me how to scuffle, and he helped me survive the first year or two that I was here in town. And so I got to know Bird as a friend of Dave's, and I was just switching over from the valve trombone to the bass, and so I would never have taken a musical instrument out and played it in front of Bird. I was too overwhelmed by what he was able to do. But I sure would go everywhere I could find out that he was going to be, and just sopped that up. It was like going to school, And I found out that he was a very gracious and humorous and kind man. And we would sit in the park and talk sometimes. I even got him to come swimming with us one time down at the Leroy Street pool. And so he was nice to hang out with. It was a shock when his life was over so fast, because I just assumed he was always going to be there.
Can you talk about his presence on the bandstand what he did specifically?
You'd walk into Birdland, especially that first month. I was down there almost every night, and his band at that time was Potter, and Red Rodney. And then the house band was all guys that had recorded with Bird. So it was Max Roach, Al Haig, Curly Russell, J.J. Johnson, Sonny Stitt, and Miles Davis. And so I would go sit there and catch every set every night. You know, it was just like going to school. And Bird would just get up and he might ask, you know, what somebody wanted to play, or he'd just say, "Let's play so and so," and they would kick it off and play it. And it was music at such a high level that all the other musicians in town would be there. You'd look over at the bar, and there'd be everybody there from Lester Young, Ben Webster, Joe Jones, Art Tatum, all kinds of guys would come down to hear all of this, you know. And Dizzy was there a lot, and what other guy?
What was it? This is so fast. Was it because it was they were playing at such a high level, or was it because cats understood that he was searching to add vocabulary to the language of jazz?
Well, it's like Al Cohen said. People think it was just that Bird was better than everybody else, but he said it was just that there was Bird and then there was everybody else. He was at such a high level of, it was a combination of marvelous technique. He really had the horn under control. He could do anything he wanted to on it. And it didn't matter if the horn was in good shape or if he had a good reed. He might get squeaks once in a while, but the music just poured out of that horn. It was just amazing. And then what he chose to play was compositional in a really relaxed, easy way. These melodies just flowed out of him. Some of them were his own cliches, you know, but a lot of them were things that he had invented and thought about. Sometimes if he'd come by your house in the afternoon and listen to your record collection, he wouldn't be listening to the bebop. He'd be listening to the Stravinsky or the Brahms. And then at that night, you'd hear some of those melodies tucked into his improvisations, you know. It was just a wonderful musical mind. It was so thrilling to be around it. And I was around some guys who had tape recorded him a lot. Buddy Jones and Jimmy Knepper had tapes of Bird from jam sessions. And it was even more and more. You just sit and listen to that stuff, and it couldn't help affecting your whole musical concept, you know. It was like hothouse growth just to be in the presence of that. And of course, when he got together with other people who were in the same ballpark, like Dizzy and Miles and Sonny Stitt and guys like that, it would just be wonderful exchanges that they would play. You know, it was marvelous, marvelous music.
What was it? Yeah, I mean, because like cats like Sonny Stitt were relentless. I mean, like in some ways, he was. There was a really heavy blues bass component to the music, and I'm just, you know, it's funny because you grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and there was this, you know, in the 50s there was that, you know, West Coast bop was going on, and then how would you describe? I mean, when did bebop take hold, and what was the music that was being played in the early 50s? Was it a fusion of the big band and in going into I mean, you came to New York right when that new language was occurring, you know?
Yeah. Well, I had just spent 3 years in the Army, and I had heard Dizzy's early records, the Things to Come and that kind of stuff. And I'd heard, like there was a radio program from Chicago that Dave Garroway did late at night. He was a disc jockey, and he used to put on Sarah Vaughan records with George Treadwell's arrangements and all kinds of stuff like that was coming up with the sensibility of the new use of harmony and some of the arrangers that were writing more modern stuff, and he played the Birth of the Cool arrangements and those things. So we were aware of Miles, and it was just a whole maybe 3 or 4 years of accumulation of music. Dizzy started that stuff when he was still with Cab Calloway, and Cab would say, "Don't play that Chinese music for me."
Wait, Dizzy was putting on like music from the Orient?
Well, that was just how he described what Dizzy was playing.
Oh, it's awesome. That is so awesome. That is classic. But I mean, how invigorating was it? You just brought up a name of a guy that were you tight with Jimmy Knepper?
Sure.
That dude flies under the radar, and he's one of the baddest cats I've ever heard. He was in Mingus's band.
Yeah.
You want to talk?
Well, at that time, it was the first year or two I was here. He and Joe Maney had an apartment at 136th Street in Broadway. That it was in the sub-basement. Well, actually, you went down into the basement where the furnace room was.
Right.
And then there was a door into a room that was out under the street. And so you could play there all night. Nobody would hear you, It was great. Bird used to drop by there and play once in a while. And whenever he did, Jimmy would turn on the tape recorder, and he'd record everything Bird played, and then during the day, the next day or two, he would try to write it down. He'd have score paper there and listen to it over and over again. And that was his practice book.
That's a good book. That's a good book.
Yeah, there were some wonderful tapes of Bird that were around in those days. Some of it's been found and published, but there's a lot of stuff Buddy Jones had that I don't think anybody ever got a hold of.
Can you talk about the idea of street academia in your time? Everything's become so intellectualized now, and a lot of learning goes on within the four walls of universities. And I'm sure there's competent professors, and maybe they were marginal players. Some of them were probably great players, but I don't think you could learn in 20 years at Berkeley what the education that you got in that sub-basement at Jimmy Knepper's house. Can you talk about that street education? I think it's extremely vital in a...
There were certain guys, actually, I found out later that Dizzy was a great teacher, but I was scared of him when I first met him. And
oh, yeah.
Actually, I got a chance to play one night with him up in Buffalo. He was stuck for a bass player, and I had a night off from my gig in Toronto, so I went down to Buffalo and played with him, and it was a terrible, noisy gymnasium kind of a place, and I think Wynton Kelly was the piano player, and a drummer named Al Jones from Chicago, and I can't think of the tenor player's name at that time. It was a small band, and I couldn't hear a damn thing. The drummer was too loud, and the place was echoey and all that. And Dizzy was hollering changes to me, which didn't mean anything to me at that time. I didn't know my chord changes. So it was a tough, and he offered for me to stay on the band, but I really had this other gig with Teddy Charles. I didn't want to hang him up, so I turned it down. And after I met Dizzy sometime later, I was playing with Jerry Mulligan, and we were playing opposite Dizzy's band down at the Village Gate. And back in the dressing room, I said, Dizzy, I kicked myself in the ass a number of times for not taking that gig you offered me. Because I found out how much I would have learned from you, And he said, that's all right, you learned it, however you had to, And, but he explained things to people in a way that was really very enlightening. He could show horn players, they say, here, it's on the piano, just look at the keyboard here, you can see where it is, Or he'd show the drummers, like, what they needed to do to make it easier for the soloist or whatever. But he had a real clear idea about the music for himself, and he didn't mind passing it on,
Oh, that's yeah. I was going to say. do you feel like cats like, Diz or Bird or, Mengus?
Clark Terry was a great teacher.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense, like, I like the fact that, who was the best, like, nonverbal teacher you had?
Oh, probably the guy that started me out, Buzzy Bridgeford. He really knew how to show me things in a way that I would remember them, When he was trying to show me what swing was one time, and he put on 3 or 4 records and just danced them for me, and I saw, I see what you're talking about,
Really? And it crystallized. It made more sense.
Yeah. Sometimes they got that gift, they can show people things and they'll remember them. Barry Harris is a very good teacher.
Yeah, no, I think that I wanted to, I wanted to ask you how did you develop? Would you say that it was through the dancing quality? How did you develop good rhythm? Because, like you said, I mean, there was a lot of times that, you'd wind up playing live with new bands, or you'd wind up in cavernous arenas or gymnasiums you couldn't hear. But how do you attribute you developing?
Well, I remember I was on one job in Detroit where the rhythm section wasn't really together at all, and I'd come home at the end of the night saying, Jesus, I think I know how this goes, but it doesn't seem to go right on the gig.
Right.
But my friend Frank Isola was living in Detroit at that time, and it was his home. I had played with him a few times with Stan Getz. And so I would get in the car in the morning and drive out to Frank's house and just play time with him for a couple of hours. And I'd say, yeah, I do know how to do this, You do whatever you have to do in order to try to get it to feel the way you want it to feel. That's all I can say.
When did you first meet Manny Album?
He was friends with some friends of mine. I think I probably met him at Charlie's Tavern. That was where all the musicians hung out in the early days.
Charlie's Tavern. Where was Charlie's Tavern located?
It was on 7th Avenue in the back of the Roseland building.
Interesting.
In the 50s.
That's interesting. So, yeah, because I noticed you collaborate. You played on a couple of albums with him, and I just wasn't sure. He's a mercurial guy that I'm always. He seemed like an inventive kind of cat.
Yeah, well, when I first met him, he was a baritone saxophone player that was writing an occasional arrangement for some big band that he might be on, and the writing just got stronger and stronger, and he stopped playing altogether because he was doing so much writing, and then later he became a teacher.
When I interviewed Phil Woods, he talked about, the world was exploding with joy after World War II, and the music that they embraced was jazz. And I was.
Well, actually, it started during the war. That was when 52nd Street got hot, because there were so many servicemen in town, and the factories and manufacturing plants were all on a swing shift, so that a lot of people were getting off work about 9 o'clock at night. And they wanted to go someplace and listen to some lively music and maybe dance a little bit. And so all those clubs on 52nd Street just were hot as a pistol in the 40s. And then when the world changed, everybody went back home to their normal lives. All those clubs gradually became Chinese restaurants or strip joints or something. And I thought that I'd missed all of the good part of that when I got here, but Birdland had just opened, and for quite a while that was a hot spot to be.
You said, was it, who was the cat that kept you from starving for the first couple of years?
Davy Lambert.
Can you talk about did he get you your first big break there, or he just got you gigs? And then the question.
Well, no, he mainly just showed me how to live cheap. He showed me where the low rent districts were in New York, and how to get food cheap. And we would do jobs together. We would go paint apartments or babysit or move people or do a car sit for them, whatever we could do to raise a couple of bucks. And we were living in a basement on West 10th Street in the Village for a while there. And then I found a cheap place over on Cornelia Street, and he came and got one in the next building. And we were friends for many years, but he finally got a nice hit with the Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. And I gradually started to get work, and it was just a matter of waiting things out,
Bill, one of the L's in my program is life, and when I talk about that, I refer to overcoming adversity, and I really like you talk to the audience about a time in music when you were really fighting it, and how you overcame it, and how it made you not just a stronger player but a stronger person.
Oh well, when I first came here, I had this one friend that I came out here with, and he introduced me to about 10 other guys, and one or two of them turned out to be helpful. There was a songwriter named Jack Siegel that he's the one that wrote "To When Sonny Gets Blue."
Sure.
And several other good songs. And he was fairly successful at that time, so he had a nice apartment over on East 55th Street. And Davey took me over there one time, and we got to be good friends. And I would go over there once in a while, and he'd feed me, or he'd slip $5 in my pocket or something like that, and it would get me through. And a couple of friends like that. John Benson Brooks was another one, a wonderful composer and piano player. And I just gradually kept finding places to play, jam sessions, and places where you could sit in, little gigs, and one thing led to another until I finally got some good work,
What about in the music? I mean, was there ever a style of music outside of maybe when your introduction to bebop or swing, where you were humbled by the music and you had a really you had a woodshed?
Well, when I first I was self-taught on the bass,
right,
and I was doing all right for about the first year or two, I guess. I was able to work with some really good people, Stan Getz and Teddy Charles and Marion McPartland. And then I got called to play with Jerry Mulligan's sextet. And he had written things for the bass that I couldn't play. Not that they were technically difficult, but I didn't know how to be accurate in the upper register. If I didn't work my way up to those notes, I didn't know how to go right to them.
Interesting.
I didn't have a fingering system that worked too well. So I realized I was in trouble, and the only guy I'd ever talked to about that said he was studying the bass was Trigger Albert, who was on staff at CBS at that time. So I called him up and I said, "Who's your teacher?" And fortunately, he said it was Fred Zimmerman, who was the first desk bassist at the Philharmonic at that time, and a very good teacher. And he started me right out from page 1 of the Simandl book and just showed me what the correct fingering system was, and he gave me plenty to think about. I was on the road with Jerry at the time, so I would come in and take a lesson and then go out for a couple of weeks and come back and take another lesson. And inside of about a year, I had my fingering straightened out and was in much better shape,
What was can you talk about some of the weirder non-traditional jazz gigs you might have had? You mentioned you played at the Village Gate. I mean, there was a time in this country where it wasn't like you'd have Folk City, which was a folk club, but Elvin Jones's group would be there.
Yeah, right.
Did you have some? I just feel like you were one of those bass players that you easily could have been, playing bluegrass or bebop.
Well, I've done some of all of that. I'm on a record with Bill Crowfoot.
Wow.
Who's a folk singer.
Wow. What album is that?
Well, I don't really remember the name of it. He had done a concert somewhere, singing and playing. I don't know if he was playing banjo or guitar, but he just had done it all by himself, and he wanted to put out a record, but he thought it would sound better if there was a bass player on it. So he had me come and dub in the bass part. Well, it was very difficult because he hadn't kept absolutely strict time while he was singing. He was very loose about it. So I had to draw a map of the whole thing and make it sound like I had been there when I really hadn't been.
That thing is released, but it's a that album has been released. It's out there.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what year? Because I don't see that on your discography.
No, I don't think I ever put it
down. What year was it?
Well, let's see. It was after the Weavers broke up, because it was at one of the guys that was with the Weavers had a recording studio up in Connecticut. That was where we did it. But it's many years ago. I don't remember. The only music I ever ran into that I couldn't play really, because I couldn't hear it, was some of the free jazz guys like Don Ellis and John Benson Brooks called me up one day and said, "Hey, we're having a jam session. We're playing this new music. Why don't you come over and try it out?" So I did, and he said, "We're playing on tone rows," and I had him explain to me what a tone row was, and then I tried to play on the row the way they described it, and they said, "Well, that's all right, but be freer, be looser," and so I kept trying everything I could think of to try to make this sound like music, and they kept feeling that I wasn't free enough. So as an experiment, I played one tune of just playing any old note that I wanted to, came under my hands that had nothing to do with how it sounded, and they all said, yeah, that's it,
Wow.
So
wow.
They said, "You want to do this again next week?" And I said, "Look, I'm just getting to where I can play this other kind of music pretty well. I don't think I want to have to start from square one and learn how to play something that I don't really hear, so thanks, but no thanks." And they said, "Oh, yeah, we understand."
What music were you just getting a hold of? The upper register Mulligan sextet stuff, or?
I'm just talking about jazz music.
Yeah, just right on. Yeah. No,
the way it is, I could play anything from Louis Armstrong to Lenny Tristano at that time.
Sure,
I was okay with any of that. But this music, I couldn't find what it was, what the game was. I couldn't find what they were hearing, and it seemed to me that there weren't any real musical choices being made. They were just throwing pebbles in the stream, and I didn't want to play that game.
It's very well articulated. Don Menza felt that way too. He knew Don Ellis in the Army, and he said that Don was playing just straight ahead, powerhouse, straight edge.
Oh yeah, I'd heard him play like that.
But then he said he came back and wound up at one of these sessions, and he was playing like 18 over 9 or 13 over 7. He couldn't figure out what the heck he was doing.
And so the joke used to be on Don Ellis's band, the only tune they played in 4/4 was Take
5. But some of that does just feel like you're chucking rocks. Do you think that? But does it take some kind of? You have to know you have to know your instrument. You have to know you have to be technically.
Oh, there's a lot of elements to it. And I know there's a lot of people who are really interested in doing that, and I say solid. Go ahead, you know. But I'm not. I haven't found a way to be interested in that.
Did you play the Colonial a lot in Toronto?
Sure, played the Colonial and the Town Tavern, two places.
Can you talk about that vibrance, that Yonge Street, and that scene that was going on? Because you left Dizzy. You could have had a gig with Dizzy, and you're like, I'm going back to Toronto.
Oh yeah. And there was a guy named Clement Hamburg.
Yeah.
That had a place up on Yonge Street, the House of Hamburg, and there were jam sessions, and there were a lot of good local players up there at that time, and it was one of the towns that was on the jazz circuit, so we would do a week in Boston, a week in Chicago, a week in Toronto, a week in Washington D.C., Philadelphia, and back to New York. You know.
Did you ever cross paths with that bass player Dave Young?
Sure.
Yeah. So he was. What other Toronto cats? Like Lenny Bro? He wasn't on the scene yet at that point, was he?
I never met Lenny, but I knew about him.
Right. Who were some of the cats? Yeah.
And let's see. There was a trumpet player up there that played a little bit of bass. I can't think of what his name was, but he was the reason I got a chance to play with Dizzy. Dizzy had come to town, and Percy Heath had just left the band to go with the MJQ.
Right.
So Dizzy said, well, I'll pick up a local bass player in Toronto. And he put the word out, and this guy that played a little bass but was really a trumpet player took the job. And he started to get blisters the first night because Dizzy was putting all these fast tempos on it. And so I started, I was working with Teddy Charles over at the other club. Teddy knew Dizzy, and he said, Jesus, Dizzy's bass player's in trouble over there. So I ran over on my breaks and would play a couple of tunes with him, you know, just to take the load off of that poor bass player. And so that was when Dizzy offered me the job in Buffalo on my off night, and after the gig, offered for me to stay on the band. Wow! But
did you mention Ed Bickert and and those cats? Yeah. So those, I mean, what was that band that you were playing with in Toronto? Who was in that group?
Teddy Charles's trio with a guitar player from Chicago named Don Roberts.
Don Roberts.
And we picked up a job there after our gig. We stayed on another week to play with Slim Gaylor, who came up without a band.
Wow.
And that was
fun. Can you talk about you've been a leader on albums, but obviously you've been an accompanist with a lot of cats. Could you talk about some nuanced qualities of what you consider to be good leadership, and maybe provide an example of one with a guy you worked with or a girl?
Well, Stan Getz was a guy with a lot of multiple personalities, but as a leader, he was really very generous. I was just a beginning bass player when Jimmy Rainey got me on that job, and I stayed for 6 months. Learned a whole lot. Played with a lot of wonderful players. And
what did you learn?
Just how to find the notes I heard and how to hear better notes.
Right. How to hear better notes. I love that. Yeah. Does that come with just like, was it helpful that you would be able to play a week at a time in the same venue with the same acoustics?
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the bass player didn't get near a microphone in those days, and we didn't have pickups or amps. So part of it was just trying to hear what you were doing and get it going,
I mean,
like on Stan's job, Jimmy Rainey was so helpful, wonderful guitar player. He showed me the chords I needed to know about, and was just a good friend, good musical support.
What about Joe Beck? Did you ever go to his farm in upstate?
No, but we played together quite a bit.
I want you to talk about that, Cat, because I saw that you had an album with him, and I think Abercrombie was on it too. And
yeah, that was Doug Propper's record.
how did that come together? And please talk about your relationship with Joe Beck. That's one of those cats that he left us too soon.
Yeah, he sure did. Well, when I first met Joe, it was on some record dates. He came to town, I don't know, 18, 19-year-old kid with all this talent, and he had a real tough attitude, you know. It was just like everything was a contest. He was winning them all hands.
Right.
But then, you know, he grew up and became a really fine, mature human being, and then he died too soon, that's all. But I met him, I got to know him better through Doug Propper, a guitar player, 7-string guitar player, had a steady Saturday night up in Brewster that I used to play, and me and Jerry Fitzgerald, the drummer. And Joe Beck lived a short drive north of there in Connecticut. So just for, I don't know, just because he needed a place to come play, I think. He would come down and sit in or sometimes play the whole night with us there on this job. And then there's a guitar player named Billy Morrison that has an art gallery up in Kent, Connecticut. And he loved Joe, and he would have Joe and me come up and play the openings of his shows there at the art gallery. And there was a singer that used to hire Joe and I to come and play for her up in that area. So I got to know Joe pretty well, and then we did some recording up at his house. He had a digital thing there, and we could squeeze into this little tiny room where the recording equipment was, and that was how come we did that record. That Doug Propper put that all together.
What year was that?
Oh, Jesus. I've lost track of that one.
No, but I was fascinated when I saw that album because, I mean, Beck, to me, you listened to him early on, and he did come. It's so funny to hear that he came in like a bull in a china shop, you know, wanting to take it all down. But you know, he was a prolific player. He had big chops too. He could.
Big chops, and not only that, he had another kind of a guitar that he played he called it an alto guitar that was tuned entirely differently. I think the low string was in the middle, and it went up in both directions, something. I never could figure it out, and I don't know how he kept track of the fingering with that different tuning, but he played the hell out of it. It was just wonderful. He was a brilliant, brilliant player.
So you did go to his farm?
No, this wasn't his farm. This is when he bought a house up in, I can't even remember the name of the town up there. It's up near where that school shooting took place.
Mm-hmm. On Sandy Hook there. Yeah. What was his, like, you guys would play like in a duo setting? At that art gallery?
Well, at the art gallery, and for this singer, we were playing as a duo. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about. I mean, not so much. Obviously, you're still gigging a lot, and you know, mentoring, but you know, what are some things that you still want to keep growing in this year?
Oh, I just feel like I've lived long enough and played the bass long enough that I feel like I know what I'm doing a little bit nowadays. And so I'm just happy when somebody asks me to come and do what I can do. You know? There's a trumpet player, Ryo Sasaki, that has a little gig out in Brooklyn on Fridays. I play out there with him, with a good guitar player, Greg Ruggiero. And I used to play once a month with Lou Caputo's 12th Beast Band down at the garage, but that place just closed now at the end of the year. So we're looking for other places to play.
What are your thoughts on getting into I mean, it's always been a tough, it's not been easy to play melodic improvisation, jazz, and make a living doing it. But is it harder today for younger musicians, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I see an awful lot of good young players around, so...
I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, is there a supply and demand issue? Because, I mean, you could do a gig and then during your set break run down and fill in for somebody else. And, I mean, you guys had more gigs than you knew what to do with. And nowadays, there's no venues left to play, you know?
Well, there's a few. I've played a few clubs up in Harlem lately that I never was in before.
Really? Which ones?
Oh, I don't even remember the names of them. People give me an address, and I go there, and it's a little restaurant that's having jazz.
But I mean, it's not something that was. It's not. It's something somewhat newer. It wasn't something that's been around for years.
No. Something within the last year or two, I should imagine, that they've put in music. And there's a lot of good young players around. God, some of these jobs that I play, like Cleopatra's Needle, I play once in a while, and there's a couple of reed players that come in and sit in with us that are just monstrously good.
In the sense that they have the technical chops, or that they can they really feel?
Oh, that they can just get into the music
Sure.
and play it well.
Right. They can feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did notice you chimed in on one of my forums about when you saw Monk Montgomery with the electric bass. You went out and bought one. You talk about did you? I can't see you.
Well, that was while I was still with Teddy Charles in 1950. Teddy was playing. We didn't have a drummer, it was just guitar, vibes, and bass. And Teddy wanted to play all these hard bebop tunes at up tempos. And when I saw Monk playing this guitar-like bass, I thought, geez, I could play fast on something like that. So I went and got one. And as long as I was with Teddy, I used that.
Wow. You were playing, that's so unbelievably that you were playing an electric bass.
It was funny. I took it around to a lot of jam sessions. The only guy that was really interested in it was Johnny Carisi. Everybody else said, "Oh man, use the upright. It sounds so much better."
Right. That's so great. Is there something to be said for the electric? I mean, because I in my research, I'm sure people were playing with it before, but on record, Monk was recorded, the first one to record the electric bass on an Art Farmer album. Is that right?
I think he might have made some records with Hamp too. Yeah, that was where I first heard him playing it.
Wow, with Lionel Hampton.
Yeah, with the big band. Yeah.
Unbelievable. All right, Bill Crow, one final question for you before I let you go. Can you talk to the audience about your concept of love and how you bring love to the world?
Yeah. Everybody loves to be loved. And so if I can find a situation where I feel that quality in the music and in the musicians around me, then I'm very happy.
All right, man. I really enjoyed it, and we probably have more to do, but I really consider this a great part one. So thank you so much.
Okay, great.
All right, cheers, man.
Thanks for calling.
Later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.